listeners. Welcome to episode 275 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian, having just finished my 17th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. Amanda Jones's upcoming book, That Librarian, will be available starting on August 27th, but you can pre-order your copy now. And if you use the indie bookseller, Cavalier House Books, in Amanda's hometown of Denham Springs, Louisiana, you can get a signed copy. I've included a link in the show notes. When you look at the cover of Amanda's book, you might recognize the Freedom Fighter shirt she's wearing. She reached out to the designer, Christy, who then designed a line of That Librarian apparel, as well as That Librarian flair, such as a bag, sticker, and mug. I love that we can all be that librarian who advocates for our library and our students' access to the books. You can always find a link to this online store in our show notes. Please know 15% of the proceeds go to the Texas Library Association, as that is the home state of the designer. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is at @LMS_United. On Threads, you can find me at School Librarians United, and on Blue Sky at SLU Podcast, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now a word from our sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I'm so excited to be working with them. I'm also grateful to Capstone for their continued commitment to support the podcast in Season 6. They are offering listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. Before we dive in, I did want to share a resource which I have come to count on especially in recent months. Like many of you, I'm expected to lead trainings for our staff during the school year and consequently seek out content which is current and well-researched. New Jersey school librarian Elissa Malespina has authored a Substack entirely dedicated to AI as it applies to our profession as school librarians. You'll find posts such as How ChatGPT Transformed My Library's Social Media Strategy, and other posts like Revolutionizing Book Displays, How AI-Powered Shelf Talkers Transformed My Library. Friends, I strongly encourage everyone to subscribe to Elissa Malespina's AI School Librarian Substack. See the link in today's show notes. And now for today's episode, Middle School Magic, and my conversation with Maggie Hall. Maggie Hall, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so stoked and excited to be here with you.
Friends, we are in for a treat today. Maggie, would you introduce yourself? Tell us where in the country you work and a little bit about your library and the grades you serve.
So I am at Spring ISD at DeWitt Middle School. It is my first year in this district. I am one of the many librarians that was cut from Houston ISD whenever they cut librarians. I was, privileged to be given an opportunity right away after, at the end of summer, finding out my library had been shut down, that I had just planted and everything was gone, and I was heartbroken. I tell people it's like professional trauma. You're like traumatized professionally at that point. But so Spring, was still on board, so super excited about librarians, definitely looking for ones that are certified. And so that's how I fell into Spring and started this year. I middle school 6 through 8, but I do have experience. It's my 6th year in library, and I have done K through 12. So I've done every grade level of librarianship.
Well, and for friends who are not familiar with what happened in Houston, this was last year. And I remember seeing photos of libraries which were going to be repurposed for something like I don't know if we could call them detention centers, but places for individuals who needed to focus on their studies. But in a rather, I don't even want to describe it because I won't do it correctly. But could you give us, for listeners who might not be aware of what happened in the Houston ISD, and friends who are in Texas, what happened?
So last year, TEA took over our district, and a part of that takeover was budget cuts on a large scale, which included essentially all librarians, and I was one of them.
Oh, but your libraries were going to be repurposed,
yes,
and not to be used as libraries anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so it sounds like you landed on your feet. Is the district that you're in right now close to Houston? You didn't have to move.
Oh, yes. We have Houston, has a lot of large surrounding districts. I've been at a few of them, and they're very close together. And so, no, I didn't have to relocate or anything.
Fantastic. I think you have to realize you're one of the lucky ones. I know that for librarians around the country, that isn't always the case.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm so grateful. You and I have crossed paths on social media, and I saw that you posted newsletters, which you share. And friends, this is an incredible window into what Maggie does and the kind of sort of year that you've had. And so I was very grateful. You posted 2 newsletters, and it really gave me an idea of just how much fun you were having in your space with your students. So, first of all, let me ask you, what motivated you to share your newsletters with the general population who might find it on social media?
When I first got into librarianship, I remember the program director saying something along the lines of, if you don't post it, it didn't happen. And essentially saying you have to go market yourself. You have to advocate for what you're doing. She would say, I know all the wonderful things you're doing, but how are your teachers going to know? How's the community going to know? It was actually a monthly requirement where I got started by the program director, just so that, and I actually loved that because it was stressful to get it done every month, but at the same time, it really created a bonding experience among the district librarians, and we learned so many ideas, and we would see each other at our staff meetings and say, oh, I tried this thing that you had on your newsletter, or that motivated me to try this, and things like that. And so that just kind of stuck with me. And I always include it just as a part of the data that we bring to our building administration, and just to kind of document, the things that are going on in library, and to share it just with the whole community.
Well, I think what I love about that is that it fosters a collegiality in working with your counterparts at the other schools rather than being somewhat competitive in nature. I think it is far more likely that you sort of learn from one another rather than feeling like you have to somehow one-up each other. And I think that when that message comes from sort of somebody at the district level, then everybody plays nicely and learns from one another and is likely to share more because you benefit from each other when that happens. How nice.
Yeah, and it was done in a real, not, there was no requirement. It could be whatever you wanted to put on your newsletter, which gave a lot of autonomy to it, even though I'm sure some of us were like, again, this month we're so busy. But I got a lot out of it, and I'm glad I kept up doing it, so.
Well, and I think it not only obviously benefits your program, but your immediate administrator, your building administrator is going to be able to appreciate it. I'm sure your families get to see it as well. I love that when you sort of discipline yourself to do this, it means that you've got a certain amount of photographic record keeping, mm-hmm. and it makes that end of year report really easy, I suppose.
It does, and I just so happen to love scrapbooking anyway and doing digital media. And so for me, it's not even a chore. I look forward to piecing it together and, seeing how to make it more exciting.
Well, for those of us who come across it on social media, we are very grateful because, friends, today we've got an episode called Middle School Magic. And I was trying to sort of describe the feeling I got when I was looking at all the things that you were doing in your school. I'm like, oh, that looks like such a fun place to be. You could feel the energy. You could feel the excitement in your space. And so, yes, we're calling it Middle School Magic. And I suspect that you are going to be sharing with us some strategies. First of all, I couldn't get over the space that you have. And you clearly are extending that invitation to the entire school community. You were hosting meetings such as the Student Council, the Honor Roll Celebration, the Spelling Bee, and the Science Fair.
Well, first, when I read through, the topics that we're going to be discussing, I kept thinking, well, I can't take much credit for a lot of this, but I'm going to, explain kind of how to condition the space to become that way. I was in charge of the spelling bee, so that was on me. But as far as hosting the space, I just roll out the red carpet from the beginning of getting to the campus. I let everybody know I have an open door policy. If the space, isn't previously booked, it's up for grabs. And I think it's important if we want a library space to be the heartbeat of the school and a big buzzing place of ideas and creativity and the hub and all these things, you really have to cheerlead for it and let teachers know you're 100% safe to do what you want to in this space. And so I do that at the beginning. I try to communicate that to staff. And then before you know it, teachers will ask you, like, can we do this and that? And I never say no unless it's already booked. And so because I kind of come with that invitation, it kind of works itself out. So yes, I have the space. I can't take credit for, managing the events, but it really is like a lively place that everyone feels comfortable in doing whatever event they have. And I love to have them.
Well, and it does beg the question. So when it comes to your schedule, when you're working with classes and when you're working with students, you obviously have to have some flexibility because when people come in and sort of take over, it is a takeover in many cases.
Yeah.
How does your schedule work with something like that?
Well, in middle school, I'm a very much flex schedule. And so a lot of teachers will sign up by having, Google shared sign up sheet for that. And of course, we have shared calendars where we know certain events, like that's not going to be a good day to utilize library, or the principal is using it for a staff meeting or whatever. And so I think in education across the board, there's a lot of coordinating, but it works itself out. If I'm not there, I trust them to sometimes use it, even if I can't be there because something else is going on, like if I have a training. And so...
Oh, I agree. Especially, even when, I'm definitely not going to be there. It's an evening activity. I know that there's a lot of setup, at least I know in my space, that has to happen because I'm set up for classes. But if you're going to bring in 60 or 70, family members coming in, we've got to do some significant switching around of furniture. And we've got some movable walls, the accordion walls that move back and forth. And so, no, I totally get that. And again, it also is really important that you have that communication with your staff, that you have ample notice, that your staff member gives you that kind of courtesy so you can make those kinds of adjustments.
Oh, 100%. Most things get booked out with at least a week in advance. And so, it's not off the cuff or anything like that. We definitely don't want chaos in the library. And everything we have, well, I like coordinated chaos is what I call makerspace most of the time. But all my furniture is on wheels, which makes, the shifting around super easy. And I'm at a middle school, and what's great about that is students can really help with setup, with cleanup. Like, we don't have para support anymore. And so I really try to put helpers to work. But yeah, that's how the events come about, is just really me being open to the scheduling and to the availability and finding ways to make things happen.
Well, and I absolutely concur that when you can harness that student energy, they are still little worker bees. I know that our middle school students oftentimes are very task-oriented, and they like to feel important and capable. And if you can harness that, you put those kiddos to work, and and they get a sense of ownership, and they're capable of doing things at this age that are important and they're valued. So I have to ask you about your weeding and your inventory, because you mentioned it in posts that you were weeding. And it wouldn't surprise non-librarians that you are doing inventory. That makes sense. But weeding is like this word we don't say out loud. And my assistant is a former math teacher, and I had to explain to him that one does not say that word out loud. And it really is something that I imagine there are listeners tuning in who would never draw attention to something that might attract some concern from your administrators. So can you explain to me how it is that you can post about something such that's so problematic as weeding in such a public space?
Well, when I'm going to start off saying that we must be different as librarians. When I saw on, the set of topics about having a negative connotation, I have never thought that way about weeding at all. I have never thought of it as a negative thing. I definitely still don't. I think, I've never had anyone even remotely refer to it as a negative thing. Even amongst other librarians, we have sessions about weeding and how we go about weeding, and we get excited about weeding. And so I was like, I wonder why she thinks that's a negative thing, or why other librarians would think that, which might sound totally bizarre to other librarians. I have no idea. But the way I feel about it is like, it is called weeding. And let's talk about cultivating a garden. You wouldn't think it's weird if someone's in their front yard pulling out weeds, or someone's going to go get their poofy hair trimmed and cleaned up. It is a part of the work. And I think that it shows that, for one, accountability, keeping your collection fresh, being completely familiar with your collection book by book. If that can take years. Don't get me wrong. I know it's not always easy to have the time to do it. But in this particular school, I can tell it had never been weeded, not once ever. And this school was built in like the 60s and is falling apart. And so sometimes it's important to get books out that might have mold on them, or really, with nonfiction, it's so important to stay current and just to ensure you have books that reflect your community. And so I take pride in doing those things.
Well, and I don't think anybody listening would disagree.
Yeah.
I think that when you are in the community of school librarians who are tuning in, we're going to sit there and go, yes, weeding is important, and it needs to happen to keep our collections, relevant to our students and current. But to non-librarians, so when you put this out onto social media that you're weeding things, the next thing that happens is those books have to get thrown away, given away, donated. Sometimes even doing that's problematic. And for a lot of people, they see that as taxpayer dollars. And this is where our non-librarians get very uppity about, well, what are you doing with those tax dollars that you are now suggesting we get rid of? And, how can you ask for more money? If you're getting rid of books, you clearly don't need more money. And those kinds of, assumptions that are being made by people who aren't familiar with how libraries work and grow with our community.
Well, I definitely can't control assumptions or thoughts or anything like that other people might have from seeing my newsletter. But I would just say that I also posted my newsletter ways that those weeded books go back into the community. One of the discussion questions was about the giveaway open house. What books did I give away? I gave away weeded books. Those books are going back into our school community for students to keep at home. I also have a very good librarian friend who works with the Astro book bus, and she will pick up several of my weeded books and take the book bus back into the district, and even sometimes other districts, and it does go back into the local and broader community. And so, I would just say that there are not many libraries I can think of that can hold every book ever. And over time, you want to refresh and get new books. And so, yeah, we weed books. They have to go somewhere. I never throw a book away. There's always a process for weeding. And those books do go right back into the community. And it's something that I'm happy to educate people on or share.
Well, and this leads me to sort of my next question is that you had mentioned that you were being able to give away the books that you had discarded. Again, I know that there are administrators who would say, wait a minute, we can't just give away school property. In some cases with larger items like furniture, I'm thinking when old furniture is removed and replaced with new furniture, there's a whole process by which that older furniture is either found new homes, but you can't just I'm going to take this home because, my school district isn't using it anymore. And so I know that for some districts, it's very problematic. If you had something replaced with a new tax purchased items, the idea of what you do next invites a whole lot of unwelcome attention.
Well, that is not Texas, or at least not Houston and surrounding districts is all I can say, because I've been in multiple districts in 10 years of education. And as far as the giveaway at this school from the newsletter, that was my administrator's suggestion. That's what she wanted me to do with the discarded books to ensure it stayed in our local community. Most of our campuses are Title I schools. Most of our students are free reduced lunch. We try to allow them to take home with them as much as they possibly can. That includes technology. That includes multiple meals, sometimes meals they take home. And so I understand that other places might work differently. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there is a process or form or something about loss. I have forms that I do for weeded books that kind of tracks, how many were deleted and weeded, as far as, keeping a track of the financial piece of it. But I have never had a community member complain about anything, or any district in Texas complain about us giving weeded books away to kids. And I think that anywhere that would is not looking at it in the right lens, I guess. I don't know.
No, I think this is great. I mean, I think it's important because obviously until we meet people whose experiences are different, we don't know any different, right?
Yeah, that's wild. No, we have had books challenged, of course. Texas has some book banning issues, so I'm not saying that community members are sometimes active in the library discussion, but as far as weeding materials or getting materials to kids or anything like that, I have never had an issue.
So, friends, I'm going to sort of tell you some of the great things that I learned about Maggie's program. And again, because you're so disciplined in taking photos and documenting all the amazing things, I was able to do my detective work was really easy for this episode. I'm looking around and you displayed pictures of kids going through past yearbooks. Can you talk a little bit about your yearbook collection? Because I know not everybody houses the repository of past yearbooks.
Well, again, my first year here, so I can't take credit for all those yearbooks that have been well preserved and kept over the years. But what I will say is I love history. I love nonfiction and teaching research and things like that. And so this is not my first school where I utilize yearbook to kind of create a timeline or history of an older school that I've worked at. And this one's very rich in history. And they have a yearbook pretty much, going back from 80s, 90s, all the way to like 2019. And so I was like, hey, this is really cool stuff. And so, yeah, I can't take credit for collecting them, but if I have them, I'm always going to utilize them in library just because of my personal fascination with the history and expository text, I think.
Are those, do they circulate or no? They are a reference. They stay.
They stay. Okay. They're not even cataloged. They don't leave.
Got it. Yeah. I know when I was going through some things that belonged to my mother, I went to the same high school. And one of the things I did when I was cleaning out some things was I found her yearbooks. And once I had enjoyed them, I then put them in a nice bag and I walked them over to the high school that she and I both attended. And I gave them to the librarian because they could then put those in their collection. So I know that those are really important. I have to ask you, there were a couple pictures where you were in a library apron. I thought that was adorable. And I have heard of librarians who regularly wear some type of apron to keep all the things because they need all the pockets. But tell me about your library aprons.
Okay, so mainly it deals with duty. So I have lunch duty, and I started off with using some Scholastic points. I saw the apron, and so I ordered one, and I love it. I don't start off wearing it. I come in, I put it on every day before lunch, and then for the rest of the day I have it because it does have the pockets, and I love it. So I have a walkie-talkie in there and, whatever else that I need. Often the pockets are so big, I can stuff books in there and run them to kids that had asked if I had it or see if it got returned. And I'll use it in that way because I wear dresses every day that don't have pockets. And so I love the apron. And so I think it was for Secret Santa or something like that we did, that another teacher got me a second apron because she said, I saw that you love aprons. And so I'm starting kind of a little collection now, and it's kind of a thing. And I think that's hilarious.
Well, and I did talk about that a long time ago about one of the occupational hazards of being a school librarian, because all too often we're on the go and there's a great deal that we have to carry around with us. And I will be the first to admit that I have sometimes made outfit choices based on whether or not the pockets were decent or accessible. Absolutely. I love that you share pictures of your students who are absolutely immersed in your collection. When you take photos, you are celebrating your readers on social media. And the photos that you have shared show the students who are oblivious to you. They aren't posing. They aren't saying, oh, Miss Hall, take a picture of me. No. They don't even know. They're not even bothering to look at you because they are so involved in the reading that they're doing.
Funny, I think some students will get themselves involved to have a picture taken by me because they know that there's an off chance it might happen, and they'll get some social media clout. So I always let students know after the fact and ask their permission before I post anything. But as a librarian media specialist, I pretty much run social media at most of the campuses I've been at. I also do websites. And so it's just kind of one of those things that I'm always taking pictures, trying to market the campus, the library program in a positive light, and snapping the readers is just a part of that. And a lot of students are well aware when they see me walking around taking photos that's the what it's for. And they're always excited because I have a Mylar screen, a very large monitor in the library that will play some of my past newsletter snippets, and they'll see themselves and they get so excited about just being on that newsletter or posted on X or whatever. And so it's exciting.
Well, and I do hear consistently librarians are oftentimes relegated to doing the media for the school and doing the reading the news or doing sort of a broadcast with the students. And don't be surprised when we showcase ourselves, because, I do that with our hallway monitors all the time, being put out those messages because we can. And you put us in charge of the website. Don't be surprised when it broadcasts all the exciting things that we do in our library. And that's just being opportunistic. But, if you don't do that, you're missing a fantastic opportunity. I want for you to give us a little more explanation about getting caught reading around campus, because, your students are so excited to be part of your social media posts. It sounds like they know, but you took some fantastic photos of kids just around campus. You were taking pictures all over the place, and it really does convey to students, I think, when they see themselves and their peers being portrayed as readers, they see that as a positive thing and something that they should admire and be proud of.
100%. I have a slogan around campus, readers are leaders, hashtag, readers are leaders. And I do, cheerlead for them when they're, a lot of students at the middle school level are sometimes even embarrassed to be caught with a book. They're like secret readers sometimes. And I try to get them away from that by just, do you. And if you want to read. And wherever you're at, read. And if I catch you doing it, you're going to get bragging rights. You're going to get a trip to Makerspace, maybe for 15 minutes from class. And I can work that out with most teachers. They're good with it. And so I try what I can to encourage that. And it's difficult at the middle school level, just because you don't see every student every day. You really have to look for those opportunities across campus to talk about books and talk about reading and the joy of reading and why it is still cool to be a book nerd.
I've noticed this, especially at the elementary school, that books are accessories. 3 years into teaching high school, anytime I've asked students about the books that they're reading, because they're actively reading or they're carrying the book, and I said, "Oh, hey, are you in that? Are you reading that book?" And they're like, "Oh, I love this book," and "Oh, well, tell me about it," or "Oh, I read that book." And anytime you see a student, and so far for me, it doesn't matter how old. And by the way, when I have colleagues who are carrying around books, this is your invitation to be able to engage people with the books that they're reading. And I think it is a signal to other readers that this is something to celebrate and something to share. And that community that you build, that relationship with those individuals and with the staff members, is important because they recognize that you as a librarian value this, that what they are doing is important. And, I honestly, this seems to be consistent for me, whether you're talking to the students in your building or the teachers in your building. So, let me ask you a couple things about your collection development, because in looking at many of the pictures that you were posting, I had some questions. Graphic novels are obviously very, very important. Can you tell us a little bit about what you have done in your space that really helps your readers find the graphic novels that they're looking for?
Absolutely. So first off, when I arrived to this particular campus, there were zero graphic novels. And I was like, what? In shock, because from what I understand, I just got here, but they do budgets every year. So I'm like, what is going on? So that was my main focus, was getting some graphic novels on middle school shelves. That's a big part of getting that age group excited about library, getting in there. Of course, the mangas and all that. That's where most of my budget went this year for sure. And so I love Dewey. I still love Dewey. I've worked with a genrefied library, but I've never fully genrefied. So I've always done what I call hybrid. And so everything is in order the way it's supposed to, but I put some type of spine label identifier for subgenres of fiction. But graphic novels have their own little section, and they have a hot pink sticker that's pretty eye-catching, so that students know what to look for, with little color keys on the bookshelf ends to help them to find it. And it's the closest to the circulation desk is where I keep my graphic novels, so that I can just point right there, says hot pink right there, and they get super stoked about it.
Well, and I think that's something that I've heard from other school librarians, that when it comes to traffic and the heavy traffic areas, you want to keep those spaces relatively close to where you are, because it allows you to have that immediacy. It allows you to be able to engage with your students in those high traffic zones. And they tend to be the graphic novel, the manga. Absolutely. And, what's fun is when your students start to support each other and helping them find the books that
I love that
they're trying to look for in your collection. It empowers them. They feel very, very empowered. I have to ask, because you were taking some pictures of students reading Guinness Book of World Records. And I was amused, because it was definitely something I could relate to at the elementary level. I'll be perfectly honest. I don't have any Guinness Book of World Records in my high school, and I don't know what is typical. I know at the elementary school level, it was very popular, and I imagine at the middle school too. Are these ones that circulate?
Oh, yeah. Students love the World Records books, the crazy but true fact books with like the blobfish and all the crazy creatures on it. I've seen that all the way up, even at high school, to be honest. And I think, especially in the greater Houston area, we have such a mixed bag of readers that you got to have a little something across reading levels, across Dewey, just across interest. And so it's definitely the type of books that I've kept in every circulation that I've had.
Well, and I will say, like the Weird But True books and the Guinness Book of World Records, I think what's fun about those is they aren't intimidating at all because there's no expectation that you're going to read every page.
Right.
Unlike a chapter book where, you are expected to read every single page. You read like those Weird But True books and you read the Guinness Book of World Records and you could just sort of, flip through them and in any particular order. And
that's one thing that I love about expository text and that's what I tell the kids, like you can flip anywhere and just start right there. There's no pressure from start to finish. And that's a big part of it too.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, you had something on your newsletter about your readers of the week. Can you give us an idea of how that program works?
It's a really informal thing that kind of goes back to the caught reading, just highlighting, clouding, making sure that those students know that they can stop by library for a treat or maybe more makerspace time. I always want to reward reading. It's nothing formal as far as like a form or, it's mainly a shout out and just knowing. And when I take so many photos, I know exactly the students when they come back and say, remember, you caught me reading. And so, and I have a pass to do makerspace or something else fun. Whether it be robot Legos, students really love to play with those. They come in and do some fun things whenever. I reward reading as much as I possibly can in the ways that I'm able to.
Well, and let me ask you about the makerspace which you offer, because I know that you have a flexible schedule with your teachers. How does the makerspace program work? Are the students dropped off or are they coming in as a class?
It's really case by case. We do have like a GT group that signs up for a weekly rotation, and it's a smaller group size. We have really large class sizes at this particular campus and district, so it's hard to bring whole classes. However, many students, if they're getting good grades or they're finished with their work, their teachers just give them a pass and they're allowed to come, and it's kind of incentive for them. It's a part of my flexible scheduling. And I often have teachers call me and just say, hey, I have a small group. I really need to work with these other kids. Can these kids just come and do makerspace? And I'm like, if it's available, I'm like, sure. So it kind of works out that way. Everything pretty much for me at middle school level is flexible. I mean, that's the word for everything. So it's all very flexible.
Wonderful. Well, you started to mention some of the more popular programs that you have. What are some things that you have definitely found are an absolute must-have in your middle school makerspace?
Oh, dear. So the 3D printer is really cool. I don't know the names of all the things, even though I've worked with them for a very long time. So the Ozobots are really, really neat. We have not a Sphero, the Dashbot, which is really cool, but they're very pricey and it's hard for students to take turns if you only have a couple of those, but they're really, really cool, which is, coding through an app to get the robot to work. They still at middle school are into Legos. The Lego robotics are cool. We have a loom maker, so a lot of the students will come and try to weave and make things on the loom. So, but there's so many other things I have on order, like putting little cars together using real tools and stuff like that. It just all depends. There's so many neat makerspace things out there. And when I talk to other people about makerspace, I tell them the idea is for it to be a collaborative, finished product where they're collaborating to make it. And whatever it is doesn't have to be any specific thing. I mean, there's so many things you can do with Makerspace. I would even consider, a group project creating like an ebook on one of those neat websites could be considered a Makerspace activity. I wouldn't say there's any one thing you absolutely have to have. I would just say what's important is a variety, because I'm always amazed at, I didn't think that student would be into that.
Well, and it sounds like you're an absolute hero to your teachers, because if they have large class sizes and you're willing to take a few off their hands, is there a separate calendar for your Makerspace availability? I'm just curious how the teachers look at this and they reach out and just cross their fingers and hope you're available.
No. It's still on a shared document. It's my same flex schedule. They would just put in Makerspace slot or whatever. And for the weekly ones, I mean, that's permanent. So it's on there every single week. My schedule is a shared document that is in my signature line. And so teachers just click it to see. And I shared it with them, of course, and they all have it. And they just click the link to see what my schedule says and plug it in there, or call my extension if they don't want to do that, because a lot of them are very busy or older or whatever. And, I just feel like, especially, I guess because I spent 5 years in elementary and I was on a fixed rotation, and it was really hard. It was just really hard to do all the things to, see 6 classes a day, do the shelving, do this and that, not really have support. And so here I'm kind of like, look, I try to be as flexible as possible, because I do have the availability that I never felt like I had before. I have multiple duties and responsibilities, but I always, just try to, especially Fridays. Fridays are fun Fridays, set aside for Makerspace availability. I view myself as a teacher support in multiple facets. And if I can't help them in that way, I'm happy to.
Well, and I'm dying to know about your mobile library cart, because this is something that for me, I remember being mobile during the pandemic. And when we were working in hybrid and we were working with students, we were not supposed to have the kids in the library, but I could take my show on the road. And I used a mobile library cart system for that entire year, even so much that I would take things out onto the curb after school, and we'd have curbside checkout. But tell me, you're doing mobile library cart, and what are the occasions that take you and your mobile library cart out? How do you utilize this in your space?
So COVID was 100% the birth of the library cart for me as well. That's where it kind of started. And even then, talk about like, if any type of pushback for library in my experience was COVID, like how you're going to disinfect the books and how you're going to set them on the side for 2 weeks and all this madness. And I remember that. But, I never did it in elementary. I didn't need to, because I saw every class every week. And at the secondary level, even at high school, I did mobile library cart. And I'm doing it at this school as well, because everything's flexible. I never know when I'm going to see certain students, and I mainly just see the main readers that want to come and want to get books. And I noticed that it was mainly 6th graders, which I was happy about, but I was never seeing 7th and 8th graders. I was reaching out to teachers to get them to sign up their whole class, and they're like, look, we can't, we just can't do it. I have had them come, since to use it for other purposes, but just for circulation, it was really hard to get them to bring, like, they mainly have 40 students. And to do it regularly, they would do it here and there, but mostly the teachers, didn't want to do it. So I said, if you don't come to me, I'm going to come to you. And it kind of started that. And I was trying to do it like every other week. And for the most part, I got out there about that frequency, but it really just depended on the schedule and my schedule, because when the problem with the flexible schedule is that every week is different and you never know. And so, of course, around testing time and all that, I couldn't do a mobile library cart. But when I did have the availability, or maybe a slow day, not solving so many tech issues on Chromebooks or doing whatever else you have to do that pops up in library, I would say, okay, it's a great day today. It's a little, I have some breathing room. I'm going to push out the mobile cart, get some books in hands. And what's funny is kids love the library cart. Kids that never come to the library, I've never seen these kids. They are stoked. They're like, how many can I get? I'm like, oh, it's a cart, so you can't take everything, but 2 or 3, get you 2 or 3. And then, see me in library. A lot of kids, even at middle school, and maybe, I don't know if it's just my campus, but they're still shocked that they're like, we can take them home and they're free. And I'm like, yes, like, get in here. So the mobile library card has been a fun experience this year.
Well, and I think something that I remember from when we did a cart checkout in the hall, I called it hallway checkout. So I'd set up 5 or 6 carts, and the classes would come down to the hallway and see me, and we'd do this out on the curb as well. But I think that in some ways, and maybe you've seen this too with your students, sometimes when they walk up to a bookcase, in many cases, these bookcases are taller than our students, and they go for the entire length of the wall. They're surrounded by books. It's overwhelming. And I think sometimes when they look at a cart, this is far more manageable. This is not overwhelming. This is a cart of books. It's like walking into something of, a retail space or a store. Like, you're like, oh, it's just the shelf where I can focus my attention, because I think that they do get overwhelmed.
Absolutely. I think, it being a very personalized encounter in their classroom with just a smaller cart is helpful. I also spend time curating the cart, like handpicking what I think the 8th grader is going to be most into, the 7th graders, make sure I have a little something for everybody, make sure I have some horror, make sure I have some my manga in there, and making sure I have something for the girls too about romance or whoever. So I think that's another part that makes it exciting, is because they see it and they're like, oh yeah, I didn't know you had that book, or do you have the whole series? And so, I think it matters. I also make sure I have a couple of Spanish. We have a lot of newcomers in this district. And so I think it matters what you put on the cart. I think not being overwhelming is good. Meeting them where they're at, helping the teachers that are too overwhelmed to come or whatever. So I don't mind doing it. I feel like part of my job description is to advocate the literacy, and sometimes that's what you got to do. So
I'm curious, Maggie, with your English language learners, how has your collection reflected the need to be able to support students for whom English is a new language?
Well, thankfully, the librarian before me did really well in that regard. So that kind of redeems her from the manga situation. But no, she this collection was already very healthy with Spanish titles, and that's the primary. I mean, I even have a couple of French speakers, and it's funny because I'll find them and put students together that are both, native French, so that they would have like a language buddy. But I do make sure it's a lot less in middle school, I would say, as far as the number of titles I have in different language than it was at the elementary level. At the elementary level, I had tons. And I would always make sure if I was getting a Dogman series that I got it in Spanish, whatever was hot at the time, I made sure to get maybe not even the whole set, but if it's a hot title, I'm going to make sure I have it in both languages. And so just being mindful and intentional about that, I think, is helpful. And it's a big teacher that you get from the ELL led teachers. They're like, well, do you have any Spanish? I'm like, yes, I do. And they have a red sticker. And I know some librarians put them separate. I've never liked that. I always include them into my collection because I don't want to be like, that shelf section is for you. And I also want them to be browsing other titles and get other things that might spark their interest. And maybe they would say, can you get this one in Spanish because it looks interesting or whatever. And so I kind of put them in with everything else in my collection and just kind of identify that they're Spanish titles.
Fantastic. I love that you have 8th grade library helpers.
Me too.
And I know that there are listeners who also enjoy their library helpers. There are also listeners right now who have not sort of made that jump into having student helpers. How did you come to decide 8th grade is the sweet spot? And how often do they come and help you? How do you use these students who are so excited about being in the library?
It is a tough process to find good student helpers. And I'm not necessarily stuck on 8th graders. That's just kind of how it worked out this year. I essentially had an informal probationary period for helpers where students that were interested in coming during what we call Eagle time, when they were done with their makeup, study hall work or whatever, they could come help me in the library. And I don't expect anyone to work for free. So I pay them at the end of the week with treats or whatever. I always put a little treat goodie bag for them. There's a huge incentive. You get to be out of the classroom, be a helper, get treats, things like that. So, I would give them a couple of weeks if someone was interested in signing up and see how it went. I would train them, work with them, work one-on-one, show them what to do. There were some that did not make the cut, and it's hard to say that, but I really needed students that, because, we don't have helpers in this particular district, and you're saying, hey, get as many books as you want. You really do need help with shelving and circulation and things like that sometimes. So I ended up with these helpers because they were the best at it and they loved doing it, and they come once a week, sometimes twice a week, just depending on the situation, but no more than twice a week. And it's for 45 minutes during their 45-minute period. Only if the teacher has confirmed with me that they're done with their studies, they're able to go. And it's really worked out. And there have been students that were great helpers that had to move or whatever, and I would fill it with a different spot. There are some students that came back and said, give me another shot. I said, fine. And then they took it a lot more seriously and ended up being a helper. So that's kind of how it's worked out. I always give them multiple chances, but there are just some that want to be in there just to play with the beeper or just to, be silly. And so I'm just like, look, I'm not, if I'm paying you, you got to do the work. If you're joking about the work, I'm going to move on. And so that's kind of how that worked out.
Interesting. But there has to be trust, right? You have to be able to trust them to do the work that they have been asked to do. And if you ding around, you have to recognize that, you've brought them in because you need help. And this is a bargain.
100%. And it's a real life lesson, I feel like. And, I give everyone an opportunity. The 6th graders really struggle with it at that point. Just like in elementary, it's very difficult to get a helper. You usually get a parent volunteer at that point. But these 8th graders, they've been incredible. They really have. And I let them know I would be so lost without their help. So I appreciate it.
I have to ask, because you're talking about helpful students. You posted some pictures of working with the 3D printer and a student taking a lot of initiative with your 3D printer. So I have to ask, because I know for many people, the 3D printer is one of the most temperamental pieces of equipment that we could possibly have in our spaces. And I'm curious to know how you've managed to harness that student energy.
Well, I would say that was a very one-off situation, because that student's dad made the 3D printer and donated it to the school. 2 of them. He hand built, so they were homemade 3D printers, and the student is literally teaching me how it works. And so I just said student-led training, because that was literally what it was. So I would say that, if I had a store-bought or a library funds purchased 3D printer, that would not have been the same situation. But that was kind of when I first arrived at this school. And I thought they were really neat, but I had no idea how to operate them. And yes, they're very fickle. And he came in and taught me the ropes.
Well, and I think listeners are nodding their heads right now, because invariably there is usually an expert that you can find in the building. And if they happen to be students, that's important, because you're building those relationships and that trust goes both ways. I think that's fantastic. I have to ask about your coffee station. I have a coffee station. Tell listeners about your coffee station, because this is something I am very grateful to have in my space.
Well, it's really a part, and sometimes I do little treats and snacks too, but man, that adds up over time, and so you got to put out the tip jar. But that's just one of the roll out the red carpet things, getting teachers in to library, kind of setting up a situation where a teacher is gonna want to come in. Maybe that will spark a conversation. Maybe that will get them scheduled in there. It's just a part of the community building, communicating process, building relationships process. I always let them know, my door is locked because all library doors are locked now, but my door is open. So they're welcome to come and knock. It's locked, but it's open. I have an open door. And, if you need to pick me up, if you need a little piece of chocolate, a little caffeine kick, I just really feel like teachers are the most, they're the school's biggest resource. And I was the classroom teacher, before doing this. And so I just want to do little things because sometimes if you're coming into a campus later in the year, I started 2 weeks after the school year started. It can be more challenging to build those relationships when everything's in the swing of things. And so it's just one of the ways that I really try to break the ice and give them a little motivation to come inside.
Well, and I will be honest, I not only do I have a coffee station, I also have a tea kettle, and I have, I use these refillable Keurig pods that you can, and staff members who are more than happy to bring in some ground coffee. I've got my little refrigerator from college with my creamers in it. And I'm not going to lie, I have a sort of Sam's Club container of ibuprofen. And that is sort of somewhere the students will not see this, but my staff knows where the ibuprofen is, and it's one of those considerably large containers of Sam's Club ibuprofen, which has also garnered a great deal of appreciation. And you're right. I mean, teachers don't come in there without in some way disclosing what it is they are working on, what it is that is vexing them, what is that they need to find solutions, and in pouring out their frustrations. And the reason why they need that chocolate, which is medicinal during school hours, in my opinion, this is something that I tell my teachers, this is my collaboration tool. This is my way of finding out what you're doing in your classes. And this is how we can, learn more about what's happening in your space so I can customize what I'm doing in my space. Maggie, I'm so grateful you were able to join us today. I love learning more about middle school and what we can do to excite our readers and support our teachers. As the school year ends, and I know you're so excited about the amazing year that you've had, can you give us a little sneak preview? What are some things that you have been thinking about that now moving into your next year you might want to explore or look into?
I definitely want to find a way to get more kids in the library, more what I call campus style field trips, virtual reality set, really cool things that maybe, my first year in, we haven't had a way to real coordinate. There's so many things I lost after leaving HISD that I'm kind of starting fresh as far as materials, makerspace. Much of it are things that I brought, on my own. And so it's hard sometimes to come up with a lot of new and fresh things that you want to do when you're kind of in the confines of a budget. But just thinking of ways to better promote library, getting kids excited and in there, thinking of ways to maybe do a little something like I do for teachers for kids, whether it's like hot cocoa bar, something to excite them, get them in there more often is really my goal. I don't want anyone to see the library just a place to go use the computer. That's a big thing for middle school. Everything is tech driven right now. And I'm trying to I love ebooks and audiobooks and all of that, but just keeping the paper alive and well and thriving in conversation and experience. And so just, contemplating over the summer, I'm new to middle school. It's my first, I taught 6th grade ELA in the classroom, but I'm new as a librarian. And so I'm really exploring myself and researching like some ideas, because I know there's manga clubs, there's all types of book clubs that we can get into, but I'm glad I had this year to get to know the students, better to come up with those ideas for next year of what I think would make the biggest hit and get the most involvement back from kids next year.
Well, and friends, I will be sure to include a link to our playlists, which also include our middle school playlist. And so if you are like Maggie and relatively new to the middle school, there are I'm looking at, I think, 9 different episodes entirely dedicated to teaching and working with middle school students. And this will be one more that we will add to that collection. So Maggie, I'm grateful you're here. Thank you so much. I know you're going to have an amazing summer vacation. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you for having me and for the opportunity to share. I really appreciate it.
Friends, if you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. Use the code UNITED to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more. And friends, as my school year has just concluded, my recording schedule will become instantly far more accommodating, and I am very excited to roll out episodes throughout the entire summer. What order those episodes will appear will entirely depend on my guests and their schedules. So join us each Friday for a brand new episode entirely dedicated to showcasing the wonderful things school librarians do every day. I hope you will tune in.